I'm Nathan Brooks, and I live in Willow Grove, a suburban neighborhood where every backyard is a manicured square and the air hums with the scent of pine. It's the kind of place that promises tranquility but harbors hostility, and that hostility's name is Karen Fletcher, the HOA president who rules with a clipboard and a glare. This story is about her, me, and my son, Caleb, whose sensory water table she drained, thinking she could dry up his joy. She didn't know I'm a water safety regulator, and I was about to flood her with consequences. Caleb's 9, with bright blue eyes and a giggle that lights up my world, even when his sensory processing disorder makes everything feel too big. He gets overwhelmed easily loud noises, bright lights, too many people, but his sensory water table, a shallow basin filled with water and floating toys, has been his sanctuary. 3 years ago, after my wife walked out, leaving me to raise Caleb alone, I moved us to Willow Grove for a fresh start. I'm a lanky guy, quiet but firm, used to inspecting water systems for safety in my job, but here, I'm just Caleb's dad. I don't advertise my role as a water safety regulator, enforcing laws to protect water use and safety. All I wanted was a calm space for Caleb, and the water table gave us that. The water table was Caleb's refuge, set up in our backyard. With a blue basin, floating rubber ducks, and tiny boats he'd push through the water. He'd sit there for hours, splashing gently, the cool water soothing his sensory overload, his giggles bubbling up as he played. I'd watch from the deck, my heart swelling as he relaxed, his hands steady in the water. Neighbors loved seeing him there. Mrs. Larson, the florist next door, would wave, saying, "Caleb's water play brightens my day." Kids like Ben from across the street would join him, splashing too, and Caleb would smile, his anxiety melting away. The water table was his peace, his safe space. Everyone saw that except Karen. Karen Fletcher had been targeting us since we arrived. Maybe it was the water table's gentle splashes, which she called a waste in her first nasty letter. Maybe it was Caleb's quiet hums, too annoying for her perfect Willow Grove. She'd march over, her short gray hair rigid, her deep neckline blouses flashing, her curvy, bulky frame looming as she barked about water misuse or noise. Complaints. Her eyes, cold and accusing, lingered on Caleb's water table like it was a crime. I'd nod, explain its purpose, pay her fines, and keep the peace. Caleb had enough struggles, sensory meltdowns, school challenges, the sting of his mom's absence. I thought I could manage Karen's hostility. I was wrong. It was a humid July afternoon when the trouble hit. Caleb was at the water table, splashing with a yellow duck, his blue eyes focused, his hums soft and content. I was on the deck, sipping iced tea, reviewing water safety reports, glancing at him with a smile. The table's water shimmered in. The sun, clean and safe, just as I'd ensured. Then Karen stormed into our yard, her face twisted with rage, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. "This water table's a hazard," she shouted, pointing at the basin. "It's wasting resources in a drought." I stood, keeping my voice steady. "There's no drought, Karen, and this table is for Caleb's sensory needs. He's disabled. It's on my property, and it stays." She scoffed, her eyes flicking to Caleb, who'd frozen, his duck sinking. "Sensory needs. It's a mess. I'll handle it if you won't." She scribbled on her clipboard and left, her heels sinking into the grass. Leaving a trail of malice, Caleb's eyes met mine, wide with fear, his hands flapping. "My water, huh?" he asked, his voice small. I knelt beside him, ruffling his hair. "It's safe, buddy. I'll protect it." But his calm shattered, and a knot tightened in my gut. Karen wasn't bluffing. I spent the next day securing the table, checking the water for safety, locking the yard gate. I photographed the setup, clean and contained, to counter Karen's hazard claim. I even drafted a polite email to Karen. attaching Caleb's therapist's letter about the table's importance, hoping to appeal to reason. But Karen didn't deal in reason, she dealt in control. That Wednesday, while I was at work inspecting a local reservoir and Caleb was at summer camp, Karen struck. Mrs. Larson called me, her voice shaking. "Nathan, get home now. Karen's draining Caleb's water table, she's got a hose siphoning it out." When I pulled into Willow Grove, the sight gutted me. The water table sat empty, its toys scattered on the dry grass, a hose dripping nearby. Karen stood there, arms crossed, her smirk sharp as a knife, the hose coiled at her feet. Neighbors watched, some filming, others murmuring, their faces etched with shock. "What the hell have you done?" I shouted, leaping from my truck, my voice raw with anger. Karen's smirk widened, her voice dripping with fake authority. "I warned you, Nathan, that table was a waste. The HOA approved its removal. You drained my son's sensory table." I yelled, stepping closer, fists clenched. "He's disabled, Karen. That water was his therapy." She rolled her eyes, unmoved. "Don't play the pity card. Rules are rules." She turned, clutching her clipboard, and walked off, leaving the empty table like a wound. I wanted to chase her, to make her feel Caleb's chaos. But Mrs. Larson grabbed my arm, her eyes wet. "Caleb's coming home soon, Nathan." I stared at the dry basin, my stomach churning. How was I going to explain this? I gathered the scattered toys, hoping to refill the table, but the damage was done. The water was gone, the grass soaked. Mrs. Larson stayed, wringing her hands, muttering, "That woman's cruel." Neighbors like Mr. Hayes, the electrician across the street, offered quiet apologies. "We should have stopped her," he said, head low. Their guilt didn't help. Karen had stolen Caleb's calm, and I had to face his meltdown. When Caleb's camp bus pulled up, I braced myself. He ran to the yard, expecting his water, but saw the empty table. His face crumpled, his hands flapping wildly. "Water gone," he screamed, his voice breaking into a wail. He dropped to his knees, rocking, a full sensory meltdown erupting. I knelt, wrapping him in my arms, his cries piercing me, my own eyes burning. Mrs. Larson wept, and neighbors lowered their phones, some turning away. I held Caleb until his sobs slowed, his small body trembling. "I'm so sorry, buddy," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'll fix this." I carried him inside, his weighted blanket tight, his eyes red and distant. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the empty water table a shadow through the window. Karen thought she'd won, but she didn't know who I was. As a water safety regulator, I enforce water use laws. And Karen's actions violated state property laws by tampering with my water setup, a misdemeanor carrying fines. She'd also trespassed and endangered Caleb's mental health, breaching HOA rules. I was going to drown her in accountability. The next morning, I built my case with precision. I pulled Caleb's therapy records, including his therapist's letter, proving the water table's critical role in his sensory regulation. I reviewed local water use codes. My setup was legal, the water usage minimal and safe. I photographed the empty table, the hose, the soaked grass where Karen had drained it. I called my regulatory office, who confirmed the tampering's legal. Launching an investigation. I filed a property interference complaint, citing Karen's intent to harm Caleb's well-being, backed by the therapist's statement. I contacted the police, who logged the trespassing. Every piece of evidence was a ripple in the case against Karen. I went further, gathering neighbor testimonies. Mrs. Larson wrote a detailed account of Karen's hostility fines for Caleb's table, threats to report his hums. Mr. Hayes described her bullying the neighborhood, how she'd fined him for a leaky sprinkler. I collected a dozen statements, painting Karen as a menace. The evidence was a tidal wave, a legal current. A week later, the HOA held an emergency meeting in the community center, a packed room with heavy air. Karen sat at the front, her clipboard poised, her smirk defiant, as if she were untouchable. Mrs. Larson clutched a photo of Caleb splashing, her eyes fierce. I walked in, not as Nathan the quiet dad, but as Nathan Brooks, water safety regulator, my badge clipped to my belt. A thick folder of evidence in hand, Karen opened the meeting, her voice syrupy with false concern. Let's address the Willow Grove water issue. That table was a hazard, and I drained it for the HOA's benefit. I stood, my voice slicing through the room. You drained my son's sensory water table, Karen. Caleb's disabled. That water was his therapy, and you stole it. Oh God, the room went silent. Karen's smirk wavered, but she held her ground. It was a waste, Nathan. Don't exaggerate. It's a crime, I said, stepping forward, handing the board my folder. You tampered with my property under state law, a misdemeanor carrying fines. You trespassed, broke HOA rules, and endangered a disabled child's mental health. I filed charges with the state. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I plugged a USB into the projector and played a neighbor's video, Karen siphoning the water table. Her smirk clear. Mrs. Larson sobbed, holding up Caleb's photo. A man shouted, "She's a thief." Karen leaped up, red-faced. This is a setup. You're twisting this. It's justice, I said, my badge glinting. I'm a water safety regulator. You hurt my son, and you're done. The room erupted. Neighbors chanted, "Step down." Mrs. Larson waved Caleb's photo, her voice cracking. You hurt that boy. The board three nervous figures whispered frantically. The chairman, Mr. Klein, stood, voice shaky. We'll vote to remove Karen. Cheers drowned her protests, her face crumpling as her power dissolved. Karen sank. Her clipboard useless, her smirk gone. I didn't gloat. I packed my folder, nodded at Mrs. Larson, and left. The real fight was legal, and I was ready. The law hit Karen like a flood. The state charged her with misdemeanor property interference, carrying a $3,000 fine and restitution. For the water table's refill, trespassing and HOA violations added $1,000 in penalties. In court, I testified in my regulator's uniform, badge shining, voice steady but heavy with Caleb's pain. I detailed the water table's role, Karen's deliberate tampering, and the trauma inflicted. Caleb's therapist spoke, her words cutting. That table was his calm. Its loss triggered severe meltdowns. The video played, Karen's smirk. A damning echo. Mrs. Larson testified, her voice trembling, recounting Caleb's meltdown by the empty table. The judge was stern. You harmed a disabled child's therapy, he said, his gavel poised. Karen got a $2,000 fine, 3 months probation, and a mandate to pay $500 to refill the table and fund Caleb's therapy. Her lawyer stumbled, and she left the courtroom. Head low, Karen's house went up for sale. Her reign over Willow Grove ended. Neighbors rallied. Mrs. Larson organized a water play day, and we refilled the table. Adding new Toys Bright boats and ducks, Mr. Hayes secured the basin, and Ben and other kids splashed with Caleb, his giggles returning. The play day was a celebration. Neighbors brought snacks. Music played, and Caleb smiled, his hands in the water. Caleb didn't splash right away. The trauma lingered, his trust shaken. But one evening, I sat him by the table, and he dipped, his hands in, giggling as a duck floated by. Water's back, Daddy, he said, his voice clear. I hugged him, my heart full. Yes, Caleb, it's yours. Weeks later, as summer faded, Caleb played daily, his hums filling the yard. Mrs. Larson brought new toys. Kids splashed nearby, and the neighborhood felt alive. The water table shimmered, a symbol of resilience. Willow Grove wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Karen was gone, and Caleb's peace returned.